Hello, testing.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We will wait for some more people to come in, but I think we respect the time of folks who are already here, as well as this is a hybrid event, so we do have some folks online as well who are also on the YouTube stream. So yeah, first of all, thanks for all joining us today. We have been having these sessions for a while now. You did not see what? Sorry. Oh, okay. To a specific language?
No, to English. I mean, translation. I mean, YouTube captions.
Oh, the link to the session? Yeah. Yes. We can get that to you. Yeah. So, yeah. So this is a series of events that we have been doing since a few months now. This is basically, I think, the 4th session that we are doing. So I'll just introduce you all quickly to our company, the concept of these web analytics meetup sessions, as well as I'll also introduce you to the speakers for today. So InfoTrust is an organization headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. We do have offices across the globe. Recently, we set up office in Philippines. We have been associated with Astrolabs for almost like 6 to 7 years now. We have a relatively light team here. We are 6 to 7 members, but our office in Dubai is mostly operational. We don't do a lot of sales here, but we are a Google marketing platform sales partner, reselling Google Analytics licenses and providing consulting and implementation support on top of that. At the core of our culture, we also want to give back to our community, and that's also one of the reasons why we are doing events like these. We try to give back to the community in different ways. Basket Brigade is an initiative that at InfoTrust we all of us come together and try to support the community, especially the needy. You can connect with us on any of these platforms. We are very active on LinkedIn. We also have a newsletter, so if you want to just go to infotrust.com and subscribe to our newsletter, you could do that. We have a YouTube channel as well as a Facebook page. We recently published a book on becoming a privacy-centric marketing organization. So this is the 2nd book of the Crawl, Walk, Run series, which is talking about the digital analytics maturity, where you start by crawling and then walking and then eventually running. Just to give you a brief history of these events, this snap is from the last time we had this event. And we've been doing this for a while now, but the primary objective is for people in data and analytics community, especially in the local chapter of Dubai, to come together and talk about the different problems that we face. For example, I think you were presented with a challenge just as of today, right? Like right fresh off the bat. So talk about those challenges, how as a community we can stay ahead of the curve and stay on top of analytics updates. So that's pretty much all I have for today. We were planning to do an icebreaker, but let's, fingers crossed, let's hope more people join. I think some folks are probably still on the way. We'll do the icebreaker at the end when we have more folks. But for now, I will pass this to the speakers here. My colleagues, I'd like to quickly introduce them. Chibugo is a senior analytics consultant with InfoTrust, as well as Anirudh is also a senior digital analytics consultant with InfoTrust. They're my colleagues here in our Dubai team. I'll pass this over to you for kicking off the session.
Okay. Thank you, Nido. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name still remains Chibugo, and as Nidal said, I'm a senior consultant at InfoTrust Dubai. I've been with InfoTrust for over 21 months now, and before joining InfoTrust, I worked as a performance marketer in one of the agencies here in Dubai, where I spent about 3 to 4 years working as a performance marketer. So without wasting time, I would like to start. So for the agenda today, I'll start by going through the overview of the current state. Then I'll go on to talk about quantifying the impact. Then we'll talk about the action plan, how you can create that. Then how you can build the right team that will support you or be part of the UA to GA4 migration. And lastly, we'll try to end the session by measuring the success or how you can measure the success and closing thoughts. Overview of the current state. So in this section, we'll try to cover ways an analytics program manager can actually migrate from Universal Analytics to GA4 successfully. So irrespective of your business brand, your business size, the location and market, this session should be enough to equip you to migrate from UA to GA4 successfully, whether you're a 360 user or you're a standard user of Google Analytics. So what this means, even if you're a digital marketer, you're a website manager, or you're into dashboarding, or you're a reporter, this section should be able to give you the timeline and what you need to know in terms of migrating from Universal Analytics to GA4. So I had to put some points down that I feel that are important that you should note while making UA to GA4 migration. So the first one is Universal Analytics is being sunset. I'm sure if you are currently using UA or you have access to any Universal Analytics account, you should have received an email that by 1st of July, that is in less than 6 weeks, UA will stop processing data. Now, this is for free users, so if you're not a 360 user, in less than 6 weeks, you stop seeing processed data in your GA4. I don't know how this will look like, but just keep in mind that after 1st of July, you may not see any user activity sent to your Universal Analytics standard account. While a year after, which is July 2024, 360 users, which are paid users, will actually stop seeing processed data in their UA. So the next one is UI will not be accessible for historical data. So according to Google, they stated that 6 months after UA will stop processing data, you can still be able to access your historical data. So what this means is that you can still analyze your data. I don't know to what level, but you can still be able to access your historical data. And while for, so what this means is for standard users, which are free users, when the UA stops processing data by 1st of July, you have tentatively till December to access or analyze historical data and possibly try to back up your data. While for 360 users, you have until December 2024, which is still 6 months from July 2024, to analyze historical data. So the next one is no migration of historical data from Universal to GA4 directly in the UI. Yes, there is no option for you to migrate historical data from GA presently, Universal Analytics presently to GA4 in the UI. But there are options provided that in which you can back up your data. And one of them is export individual reports. Now, the exporting of individual reports is available for both free users and 360 users. What this means is you need to go into your reports, select date range, probably when you started collecting data in your UA, and export this data to either Excel document or Google Sheets. There is also another option, which is the use of Google Analytics Reporting API. I myself, I haven't used this before, so I really don't know how it works, but this is actually another option you can use to back up your data. Why the export to BigQuery is only available for 360 users, because you have the option of integrating the BigQuery to your Universal Analytics, which enables you to export data. So for free users or standard users, this is just a very quick report if you're looking at exporting your data. So whenever you want to do that, I recommend you add a secondary dimension, which is date. This will enable you to break down your report by days. So even if you export it maybe offline as Excel document or online Google Sheets, you should be able to use this as a data source for your reporting platforms like Database, Looker Studio, or Tableau, and the rest of them. So by adding this date, you will see that you've broken the data by days. So This report was just for April, so you can see that 10th, 9th, 8th, 11th, we'll have all the data here. So you can replicate this for all the reports that are relevant to your businesses. If you don't do this by adding the secondary dimension as date, you will end up exporting more like a summary of your report based on the date range you've set. So I recommend you always add the secondary dimension, which is date, whenever you're trying to export any report. And the fourth one is at very least end of June 2023, you should try to migrate to GA4 or maybe dual tag if you're looking at having year-to-year data. But since it's already late, standard users may not be able to benefit from this because you barely have six weeks to do this. So I think standard users only have the option of maybe comparing 2 months, let's say from now till end of June and maybe other year. Why 360 users, since they still have until July next year, 1st of July next year, and for their UA to stop processing data, they can still go on to do a tag so that they can be able to have year-to-year data analysis. And we also have the fifth one, which is we understand that all product features are at parity. Yes, we do know that not all features are available, and people are already complaining that. But one thing you need to know is that Google has a roadmap of all the features they are going to implement. Yes, this may not be visible to you, but there is a page on the support page where you can actually keep track of all the new releases on Google GA4. So you may want to keep track of that and always be informed on what is available or released. And lastly, Optimize will be sunset on September 30th of this year. So if you do use Google Optimize for your A/B testing, you must have received email that by 30th of September, you won't be able to use the platform anymore. So I know a lot of people started using this recently, but the good thing is that Google is currently collaborating with a couple of A/B testing platforms to integrate them to GA4. So right now on their support page, you see that A/B Testing, Optimizely, and VWO are the 3 listed A/B testing platforms. So you may want to start testing these platforms to see what best works for you and your business. Just to mention that currently InfoTrust is a partner to Optimizely. So if you're wishing to get a partner or help someone that will help you get a license and probably educate you on how you can use Optimizely, feel free to reach out to us. Any question before I continue? Okay. So the next is what this means to business. So if you're looking at migrating to GA4, there are a couple of things you need to keep in mind. Now, one of them is you need to keep in mind of the product, which is GA4. You also need to keep in mind of the team, and as well as timelines, which I briefly explained in a few slides above. So for GA4, you need to understand, check or investigate, read blog posts and maybe newsletters to understand if this product is ready. And yes, I would say to a certain level it's ready for all businesses, and for some of our clients, they are really using that now as their source of truth. So you also need to understand if it's privacy compliant for your business, and as well as whether you have the skills to actually pilot this migration from UA to GA4. Another thing you need to consider is the market technology. So the marketing technologies, you need to consider if GA4 is currently supporting this. Now, I mentioned that Optimizely will stop processing data or will no longer be available by 30th of September. Now, I don't know when the integration of Optimizely and the 2 A/B testing platforms I did mention will be available for integration in GA4. So it's something you may want to keep watching to know when this will be available for your business while you keep trying these 3 platforms. So right now, a couple of marketing platforms are available, like the Google Ads, DV360. These are all available for integration in GA4. You also need to consider the team to know the level of knowledge your team have in GA4, because that will be very, very relevant in terms of migrating to GA4. yes, your team, depending on your business and how large it is, your team will really play a huge role in terms of migration, considering that they will be the ones testing. There are some data governance that only your team may be allowed to test or access some data or reports or platforms in your business. The last one is the timelines, which I already mentioned. So you need to keep in mind the UA sunset dates, know whether you are going for dual tagging, and plan ahead. All these will be relevant while working on your project plan for the GA4 for the UA to GA4 migration. So you also need to keep in mind of the 3 third-party cookie deprecation and how you can actually handle that. I won't really go in depth in that aspect, considering that is not part of our topic today. And the next one is the optimized sunset, which I already mentioned. So where do you begin? Quantifying the impact. So for this session, we decided to use a business as a case study. So we'll be using Lego. So, but before I continue, this is just a disclaimer that the information we'll be sharing about Lego may or may not be correct. But one thing you need to know is that our intention of using this is actually to communicate the UA to GA4 migration. There is no intention of passing wrong information about the business. So imagine that you are leading UA to GA4 migration in a brand or a business, be it you working in an agency or you are working with Lego and you are in charge, your team and yourself are in charge of GA4 migration. There are a lot of things you need to consider before you can continue with or you can proceed with the migration. And one of them is you need to understand the scale of the region. So right here, we've been able to come up with the regions where Lego businesses are available. So out of that 5 regions, we have about 37 markets. And currently, this is just an estimate, like I said. We have 5 markets that have base GA4 tagging. So what this means is that currently, out of the 37 markets, 5 markets are currently collecting data, let's say page view tags, page view events, and event count. This can be possible when in a business where certain regions and markets are sovereign to a certain level. So maybe they have that authority to make changes to their platforms, create accounts, like GA4, and maybe start collecting data without even the HQ being aware or getting authority from HQ. But in a situation whereby these decisions are to be taken by the HQ team, it may not be available. But in another way, we are going with this. So 5 markets in our case, they have the base tagging available. And while the rest of the markets are still using universal analytics as their only source of truth. So when you're looking at migrating to UA to GA4, there are certain risks you need to assess. So in our case, we'll try to assess some risk the Lego business are most likely going to face when they're trying to migrate from UA to GA4. So one of them is timelines, okay? So that goes back to the UA sunset date, access to UA historical data, and Google optimized sunset. So you need to keep in mind of all this, especially when you're creating your migration plan. The time when you need to export your data, of course, I would advise you don't have to wait till end of this year to start exporting your UA data, especially if you're a standard user. So it's something you can, if possible, you can have this done on or before 1st of July. We have other couple of things you need to keep in mind, which is the sunset date. For standard users, you just have barely 6 weeks, as well as Google optimized. You also want to start upscaling on that or to better find the best A/B testing platform that will work for your business. The second one is the scale of business. I know I did mention the number of regions and markets available for Lego. You may want to understand the market presence. Now, irrespective of the business, it's not just only the Lego business we're using as a case study. You also need to understand the digital properties. So by digital properties here, I'm talking about the website and the mobile app. Okay? And you also consider the business segment, which is B2B and B2C. Yes, we understand that Lego Business is actually an e-commerce platform or e-commerce business. In some cases, they may have B2B and B2C. So you need to put all this into consideration while migrating. And this will better help you to define your account structure in GA4, whether you are looking at going to one property to manage all the markets, or you're looking at having multiple properties, or maybe using just one property with sub-properties to filter data for all markets. The third one is the current status, which is GA4 deployment stage. So in the previous slide, I did mention that 5 markets already have their page view tags available. So you may want to consider this while you're making plans or creating plans for your migration, because this will make you understand, or maybe you can use this more like trying to understand what the data looks like ever since they implemented this, so that you can know the measures you can take to mitigate data loss or issues they are currently facing. And the next one is the level of impact. So before you start migrating from UA to GA4, you need to consider the impact it will have on your existing reports, be it your custom reports in UA and maybe other third-party platforms you are using like Looker Studio, Databus, and the rest of them. So you may want to check if the metrics and parameters you are using on those reports are available in GA4, or how you can replicate such reports when you eventually migrate to GA4. And lastly, which it will have the challenges, which is the most biggest risk. One of them, which is event mapping and consolidation. I must say that this is one of the difficult aspects of UA to GA4 migration, considering that in a business like this, where you have about 37 markets, there may be certain events that are local to that business. Now you need to export your reports, your event report in UA to better understand events each of the markets are currently tracking. Now you will agree with me that in UA we have the UA event structure is actually the event, which is custom event. Then you have the event category, action, and label that are collecting data. While in GA4, it's more like it's very flexible. Just events, which is the actual event name. Then you can add any parameter, give it any name of your choice. So you may want to consider this, export your UA data, try to consolidate as much as you can, rather than just having multiple events that are actually tracking similar data, maybe just a tiny difference. You may want to consolidate events like this so you can have a minimal data being sent to your report. The next is tech development resources. Now, considering that the sunset date is near for standard business owners or users, you may want to increase your development resources so you can be able to complete this migration at least on or before July, which I doubt. I don't know if it's going to be possible, but it's something you need to consider as well. Another challenge you may face is code freeze. I know a couple of businesses, they do have code freeze towards the end of the year, where they don't do any rollouts or changes to their code. It's more of marketing and trying to generate revenue. So you may want to put that into consideration when you're creating your project plan. And lastly is the training and upskilling, which is very, very important when it comes to UA to GA4 migration. Reason is that the platform, I would say, is new, but myself, I did face challenges while I was, when I started using it. So I believe people are most likely going to face these challenges. So the earlier you start training and upskilling your team, the better for you, so that they can actually support you fully in terms of migration, at least understand how the UI works and being able to test and validate data while the migration is ongoing. So that is it for the assessing the risks. I don't know if you have any question before we move to the next slide.
I'm sorry, what is G4?
Okay. GA4 is actually Google Analytics 4, which is the latest, yeah. Sorry that I didn't specify that. So UA is actually Universal Analytics, while GA4 is Google Analytics 4, which is the latest one we are talking about. Any other question before we continue to the next? Okay, so the next one is creating an action plan. I will hand the floor over to my colleague, Anirudh, to take it up from here.
Thank you, Chibugo. Welcome, everyone. And this will be a session on creating an action plan. But before we jump into the details and weeds of how exactly do we quantify a success of an action plan, we'll just take a moment to reflect on what challenges that Chibugo just mentioned for us. So first and foremost, who this session is for, right? That is for anyone who is a product owner of analytics on a client side. So with the change in Universal Analytics sunset, there's a lot of changes that we need to do in our tagging because the tool is very different. But that's not the only change that we need to worry about, because while the immediate problem is from the GA4 migration, we have some other changes on the horizon too around GDPR, privacy, and the other compliance. So an action plan or a proper action plan will actually cater to your requirements of your GA4 migration, but it will also set foundations for your changes on privacy and compliance. Now, the other thing is, which Chibugo mentioned in really great detail, is that the current condition of anyone who's invested in GA is a bit tricky because we are approaching the deprecation date for free properties, which is in a matter of months, but we're also just 1 year, we are also very close to the 1 year mark for the 360 or premium users. So the point becomes then that, how exactly will we go about this migration and what things to worry about. So this session is meant to be a guide for anyone who's handling analytics as a product on the brand side, to basically focus on what to worry about and what not to worry about, and then reach a point of minimum hurt. It is going to be a journey and it's going to have its up and downs, but the point is to bring you to a point where you have less regret over losing what you had, depending on how your company is structured. Now, the reason why we took the example of Lego when we were explaining the action plan in the session is that because creating or migrating GA4 over a smaller brand for just one market is fairly straightforward. It is still a significant amount of work, but it's straightforward. But when you add the concept of scale, like different properties, different regions wanting different things, liaising with each other and creating an action plan and executing it becomes much more difficult, right? So that is the whole idea behind the session, and you will notice that there are many things here which we'll talk about, but it's more focused on the total breadth of the experience of GA4 migration and not the depth. So we won't get into event migration, we won't get into how the server side work or consent mode works. We can, and that will be a very good idea for a different session. But for this session, we are focused on just the total experience of making the experience of the analytics owner simpler. Like that's the whole perspective around the session. So now, let's jump in. So if I was the product owner for Lego, and if I was focusing on, okay, I have all these different markets and I need to focus on creating an action plan and migrating, what do I focus on? The first thing I would do is first check how well does the product that I'm trying to push to my other employees in regional teams actually measure up to my current requirements. So the idea here is that every person on this meeting, but also over the regional team, would take these basic conditions and evaluate them themselves. So for example, if I was part of Lego UK, I would see, okay, you know what, custom channel groupings is a main priority for me. So I would consider that as my evaluation condition to moving to GA4. So does GA4 have that? Okay, yeah, it does. Then we'll talk a bit about customizing standard reports. For anyone who's used Universal Analytics before, you will know that the custom reports are good, but they are not very, very functional, not as much as GA4 anyway. So GA4 gets the advantage there. And then we have other traffic and acquisition metrics, which are important because you also have to show value for your analytics investment, right? So we talk about that there. And we have the basic e-commerce and custom event line item, which would depend from market to market. A very quick reminder that we did see in the first few slides that for some markets under Lego, like the first 5 markets, actually had some base level tracking, right? So in that case, we would say that yes, these 5 markets have custom event tracking, but they're maybe a little behind in the e-commerce section. And all the GMP integrations should be available, because the main idea for some companies around investing in an analytics platform is media activation, right? I mean, why would you invest so much in an analytics platform if you can't leverage the audiences from it? So that's about the integrations, and then we have the product and item scope custom dimensions, which are more focused towards an e-commerce audience, though it has use cases for other verticals as well. The last bit is around consent mode, which is more privacy focused, which is a pretty important enhancement to have in the current age. But those would be the first step that I would look at if I'm trying to assess the product which I'm trying to lobby into my company, and to show everyone that, you know what, this is what we are going to be moving into. So that's the first step of assessing the product and taking it further. Now, before I jump to the next step, any questions so far? Going once, going twice. Looks like we're good. Let's jump in. Great. Second step would be, how do we actually prepare? Or rather, second step would be something that I would do, which is, okay, now that I've gotten some handle on how well does GA4 really match up to its previous version, how do I manage the news around deprecation, right? I mean, what do I do now? And that would basically be in 3 main things. Again, there are other actions you can take based on how your company is structured, but these are the 3 things that we should probably focus on. First and foremost, which is the centerpiece here, is doing a historical data import, or rather a data backup. So please move all your historical universal analytics information into your data warehouse, which can be BigQuery for some people, which can be Redshift for someone else. But the idea is, have your data from GA3 ready and available when you need it. Please don't wait for the deadline. Now, the second thing is, how do you communicate the progress of what's happening on this deprecation side of things, right? So the first thing is the updates on the side of products. For example, we did measure in our previous slide how does GA4 measure up with UA. Let's say that for some use cases, we wanted custom channel grouping, but it was still not launched in GA4, right? So that would be a pretty important pain point for all the markets to know that, you know what, we are moving into this new product tool. We are investing quite a bit, but we don't have the feature that we need. So making sure that that kind of progress updates keep going around the product's maturity is very, very important, because that keeps everyone a bit sane, for a lack of a better word. But it also instills confidence in people that they will be able to use this tool and move ahead. The second update would be around dev updates. This is just a word about the implementation work that has been finished and what data is available in your GA reporting for you to make sense of, right? So we'll get a bit into that bit later. But the third line is around timelines. It's always good to actually work back from the end result. It keeps everybody aligned. So knowing the dates of GA3's deprecation, knowing the date of optimized deprecation, knowing when third-party cookies will be deprecated, it all makes sense, and we need to take stock of all that and make sure that we ensure and inform everyone that we have those things in our radar and we are actually taking steps to prepare for it. So that's historical data backup, and we have gone through communication progress. Now we'll talk about evaluating critical reports. Chibugo did actually touch on this matter before, but this is another way of just ensuring impact, because we can't create a proper action plan unless you know what you're solving for. So evaluating critical reports speaks to that. So let's say that you're a big house like Lego, and you have all these different markets. So the question becomes, what is the most important value that your stack is driving for you now? Are there any dashboards? Are there any BigQuery tables that you have? Are you doing media activation? Like, what critical reports that you're looking for or your management is looking for that is indispensable for this migration? So you first start there. So now you have the critical reports, now you have your data backup, and now you have the communication. And then we'll talk a bit about the consequences of not doing it, because where's the fun in skipping that part? So if we don't do a historical data backup, we end up coming very close to the time zone of deprecation, where we don't have any data around universal analytics. And at that point in time, you better make sure that the data that you have in GA4 is reliable and functional. Otherwise, it'll be very hard to define and show progress or value of the tool itself. Communication progress, if you don't do it, the problem is people will get really unnerved about why are they being asked to loop into this product where they have no visibility on how it works and they don't know what kind of work has been done. So there'll be a lot of friction in them adopting the changes that you're recommending. And evaluating critical reports is probably the most dangerous after the historical data import, because you might set up everything for your UA to GA4 migration, but then end up solving for the wrong thing because the reports that you needed to work on were never set up. You never took the time to set up the pipelines or the BigQuery or the additional plugins that you needed to work with. So all these three factors are small, but they all contribute very significantly to your end result. Yeah, I can jump to the next slide, but before I do that, any questions here? Or
I have a question on the historical data.
right.
Assuming that you are currently we are using the GA3 version and the
Right.
event structure is totally different. So the event structure is totally different.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to know how helpful is it just to take a backup and then have a seamless reporting going forward, in terms of just an event structure, nothing much.
Yeah.
Because, if I'm using the event in universal, which is like a category action label,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't exist in GA4 anymore, right?
Correct.
It will be more of a event activity one.
Right.
So what is the best practice, or is there anything which we should consider while taking the backup or while implementing?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you so much for that, Shanky. So I guess the main objective of doing a historical data import is to actually make your learning curve to GA4 a lot smoother. Ultimately, the data model that you have for UA will be replaced with what you have in GA4. But until that time comes and until the pipelines and just the kind of structure that you need around the tool is built, it'll just make sure that you're not flying blind, essentially. So that's the main thing. And yeah, so ultimately, it's just supposed to smoothen your learning curve and just get you where you're going with a minimum amount of headaches, if you will.
Which means that the sooner you do is better.
Yes, yes, yes.
For historical data before it's unsigned.
Exactly. And the one advantage with GA3 was that when you do link your property with BigQuery, you actually get 13 months of backfill for that data, assuming it's not linked. It hasn't been linked before. So that's something that can work in your advantage without any additional cost, which might be a pretty interesting point to remember. Thank you, Shanky. Okay, any other questions? Looks like I'm doing well so far. Okay, moving on to step 3. So now that I've gone through the process of assessing the product, and now that I know what 3 things that I want to focus on for this migration, the next thing comes is, how do I recognize and prioritize my order of execution, right? Now, Lego might be operating in different countries, but there's a very good chance that all these markets have their own different marketing structure, and they all have their different key flows, right? So what you think is valuable in UK might not really be of value in Middle East, let's say. So every market has its own data that it actually values and what works for them. So the question becomes is, or rather, it's very easy to find yourself in a position where you have a lot to do and you don't know where to start. So the answer to that is in actually prioritizing and just adding some order to your execution. And what I mean by that is, first and foremost, you first start with, rather, you start from the end. You first look at your final conversion or your funnel, and then you work your way back from there. So you first start with your e-commerce events, and then making sure that your complete e-commerce flow, or the funnel as we call it, is actually tracked. So when I say e-commerce funnel, I'm referring to purchases, add to cart, checkout. I'm sure we all know where I'm going with this. But the point to note here is, while the example given here is for Lego, and which is why I'm making this an e-commerce use case, but if let's say you are a different kind of business unit, which, for example, if you're into logistics, then that first point would become any event which is driving revenue for you, or any event which is an indicator of revenue for your company. So that is the first level of check that I would do, and that would be another important milestone for me, which I'd give as a roadmap to my regional countries, to my regional teams. So focus on e-commerce, events, and conversions, because that's the must-have. And then once we have that, we'll focus on key funnels and flows. Key funnels and flows here talk about the other features that we have on the website, which are very, very important or have a business use case around it. So we focus on conversions, and then we focus on key funnels and flows. And then we talk about navigational events on, navigational events roughly refer to UX and UI improvements on how the user is actually finding stuff on your website. But, in terms of importance, they take a backseat compared to the key product funnels that you need, and the most important, the e-commerce information that you need. And finally, once you have done these three phases, everything else around general events can, go under a separate phase, which is not less important. If you're looking for examples on general events, these could be PDF downloads, scrolls, search category, depending on how important that is for you, and the other stuff. But this is the way that this is another ingredient, I would say, in creating your action plan, which would solve things for you. Again, because I never get tired of saying this over and over again, but we need to recognize that not all events are equally important, which is why we need to pick our targets and make the most out of our time that we have with GA3, because that is one resource that we can't really bargain with. Step 4 is, and let's just do another revision. So because we talked about priorities and order of execution, the next step would be around accounting for new industry headwinds. So the most thing that we've talked about so far is just around GA4 stuff, but an actual action plan will solve more than one things for you, because believe it or not, we're in the middle of a lot of change. And a proper action plan would be something that will also help you address these other issues that are on the horizon. And that would, for me, would be optimize sunset, third-party cookie deprecation, which hasn't happened yet, but it is scheduled to happen sometime this year or probably next year. And we also have changes from the regional data protection agencies and data protection frameworks. So we need to ensure that we do all these changes or account for these changes when we set up our measurement, but more importantly, our MarTech stack. So I can jump into a bit of some of these because I think they're important. But before I do that, any questions so far? Sweet. I will say one thing though. For the regional DPA section, that might be something that has a pretty serious consequence on your MarTech stack compared to the other things, because UA sunset, optimize sunset, and third-party cookie all only seem to affect your Google marketing platforms. But GDPR has a very far-reaching consequence and basically questions and sets rules across anything which stores data for you. And what that means for you is that you need to be mindful about where you store data in BigQuery and how long you store it for too. We can jump into that section as well, where we talk about the effectiveness of privacy settings for GA4, but I can jump forward. Great.
I have just a question regarding the data protection laws.
Right.
So we speak about GDPR and CCP and all that. For example, we are a Saudi-based business, like the company which I'm working for.
Right.
So they are also coming up, Saudi is scheduled to launch something called as PDPL, which is a similar version of GDPR. One of the major requirements for that, which we have learned and which is too early, but we have just heard about it, is data residing within the region. So is there something similar which is available in GA4 that which will assure that the data which is stored has some kind of, like, Google has some data centers within GA4. I'm not sure if the question is relevant over here, but like, if you guys have any knowledge around it, like, you know, like Google is coming up, or like, that's one of the important questions also we should keep in mind before migrating to GA4. That's what I feel.
Right.
Because if that's not there, like, you know, the whole implementation might
Correct.
be a big question once we have done it, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a very valid question, and essentially, right now, we do have some settings, or rather, we have some settings to actually cater for those kind of changes. But I think it's always good to not depend on an automatic platform like Google to do that groundwork for you, because the consequence of not having that up to the mark is too high. So Google, for example, for sensitive information around users, which we often call as Google signals, because that relates to Google sign-ins and audience and the other age-related information, that does have region-based controls, but right now that's the only extent of it. I would rather, probably worry about that in BigQuery and creating a different framework for that. And since you bring this up, and because I think some people who are going through this migration might find themselves, especially with a company that has the scale of Lego, might think that, you know what, now in one region I have GDPR, in one region I have CCPA, and in another region, like you said, in Middle East, we have a different DPA coming up. Then the question becomes, how do I set, all these regions up with as per their own DPA models, right? That makes no sense. I mean, how can you possibly customize it so much? So what does the answer become then? And that is where you have to choose and take a stand to actually go for the most restrictive DPA model that is there, because at least that way you don't get fined for your property. So right now, as things stand, it's GDPR, which is the most stringent. So if I was in Lego's place and if I was dealing with the same situation where CCPA is telling me to track something else which is illegal, we have in Middle East a different platform, I would take GDPR as my standard of data protection framework, and I would set up everything basis that. Clear?
Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome.
Can I just add on to that?
Sure. Yeah.
So I think it's a very relevant question. When you look at some of the existing regulations out there, right? I think the data transfer between the continent of Europe to North America has had a lot of focus. I think I'll move this side a bit. Yeah. So that's one area where there has been a lot of focus. There's been talks of like a transatlantic like data transfer or an agreement between these like continents and the different authorities, but that has not been finalized yet. And that's one where there's a lot of like that Europe and North America are markets that are much more advanced. This is where analytics was born, right? Middle East is still adopting it. As we all know, we all work here in Dubai. So in your case, I think you are in a situation where there's uncertainty. You do not know what will happen of it. But I think as of now, almost all of us are uncertain about it, because when this becomes a problem, then Google will need to address it, right? Now, they've been getting pinged from like different directions, like, different countries have different regulations. So they need to like tackle one at a time. And then that same thing applies to any other like martech landscape player out there. So this might grow to be a bigger concern. And then when they need to address it, they'll probably need to address it. But I think as of today, most of us won't have an answer to that. Like, whether Saudi data collected from Saudi will reside within Saudi. Does Google have a plan for that? Yeah, unless we have inside information, of course. We don't know.
Great. Thank you, Nadal. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, I guess that settles the part around data protection agreements. But again, thank you, Shanky, for bringing that up. Very, very valid question that I would definitely consider when I'm building my action plan for Lego.
I have one question. Can you go back?
100%.
I'm confused about regional DPA. What is the framework of regional DPA? Is it sort of like in accounting we have sort of IFRS, like there is certain accounting standards, those apply within jurisdiction. What is that? Is it sort of a general standard that applies to all?
No, so right now there is no general standard. I guess the closest that we can get to a general standard is what Nidhal was mentioning, which is a transatlantic framework between US and Europe, but that's around data collection or data storage only. But
Okay.
DPAs have there is no, every region might have its own definition of how they want data handled. So it's a little hard to create one size that fits all, which is why.
Okay. I'm mentioning another thing. Is there a sort of a logo that is used by digital DPA, or did you just?
Oh, that was just the GDPR logo that I've added there because that's one of the most prominent DPAs that we're dealing with.
Okay, I thought it's a proper regulatory body that.
No.
Use.
But
Okay.
a good call out, something I'll remember for my next session. Very nice thing to for me to be mindful of. But thank you so much.
So just to add on, DPA is short for Data Protection Authority. So it's like a legal body within a region. Different countries will have different DPAs. So Italy will have its own DPA, Data Protection Authority. Yeah, it's like a body of like regulators coming together and just to define like rules and set up the
Right.
data protection rules, right, to protect the privacy of their citizens, basically. So that's what DP. It's like it's not a one entity. It's like you could have multiple entities in multiple countries, and they all work differently.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no one centralized DPA, but we have
Exactly.
regional DPAs which work and govern laws around it.
Primarily focus on storage of data and the use of data.
It could
Well-
concern other things also,
Right.
but these are just main elements
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, there are different aspects to DPAs. Like Anil mentioned, storage and use of data is one thing, but some of them in some regions might have different and more far-reaching consequences, and they might want to increase their scope. So that's another case which depends on each regional DPA on how they want to enforce it, really. Great. I think this was really, really helpful. Any other questions so far? Because I think we've got quite a bit of traction on this topic so far. Sweet. Going once, going twice. Nice. This is just a generic step that I would take. So we did talk about creating and recognizing priorities. We talked about accounting for the industry headwinds that are heading our way, and now we'll talk about project management. Why would I make this a separate step altogether in my action plan for Lego? Is that because when you're dealing with multiple regions, multiple priorities, and just multiple ways of working, you need someone to actually liaise with everyone, and as much as you'd like, there's a good chance you may not be able to do it all on your own. Because every market might have their own development support, they might have their own separate team which approves funding, and unless it's a perfectly built out company where every region follows the same process, you will need this. So just a bit of context around why project management is important, because they will help you plan and set milestones and deliverables, and also budget, of course. They'll also help you with resource allocation, because if you are part of a general global Lego team, you need to be mindful of how much time you are spending on all the regions, because your purview is quite huge, and you need to be careful about are you giving help to regions that need help versus the regions that can do tough stuff all their own, and you're spending time there. So it's also a matter of managing resources on the other side on the regional team, but that's something that they can help us do. Risk management, because this helps with communication. My personal motto is, if there's any bad news, it's always best to communicate it as soon as possible. So if there is some bad news which is happening around some milestones not being met, everybody knowing that as soon as possible is better, because that gives them more room to navigate and make changes so that they're not as much affected as they were. And just the last part, which is probably the most important part, is communication. We need someone to be in touch with these regional teams and make sure that everybody is on top of the recent progress around implementation, reporting, and just general risk management. So I would involve some project manager which would help me manage these regions and actually keep track of their progress as they move further too. I don't think we'll have any questions here, but I will pause. Force of habit, I guess. Great. Now we'll talk about something that's probably very important. So now we know the action plan, or rather now we know the context of what's happening in the market. We know that GA3 is going away. We know that GA4 requires a good deal of effort. We know that we have limited amount of time. And we talked about how we would actually build an action plan to actually reach a point where we have as much support as we can get and make the best outcome of all of the situation, right? Now the question becomes, okay, now you have thought out the theory, now you have mapped up all your project plans, how do you execute it? And that's where you deal in the actuals of the world, because now you're out of the paper and now you have to figure out who to talk to, and then you run into problems of people and process, which is very different from what we've been dealing so far, right? And that's magnified significantly when you're working on a huge organization like Lego, which has multiple scopes and multiple markets, because again, different ways of working. So building the right team, this is just an open question on, and you know what, for anyone who's willing to speak, I would love to hear from all of you on what would you do if you were managing the Legos GA migration. What kind of team would you build? Because I have an answer which is like the most minimum framework that you need, but I do want to hear from all of you, because I guess you might have better thoughts on the matter. So if there's anyone who's willing to speak, that's fine. Otherwise, I can skip to the next slide.
Me, it looks like probably depending on the scale of websites in different markets.
Right.
Say in your Lego example, you had about how many websites again?
Around 70, 75.
70, 75 websites. I think it could be achieved with probably 3 people who are hands-on with GA and Google Tag Manager when it comes to website.
Right.
And how you structure the project, including the whole team, including if I work on such a migration, I myself work with my team to audit the website, to give recommendations, prepare tags, set up events. So depending on when you start, I think 3 people who are active enough could do the job.
All right. So it is 3 people, but they all do the same work of managing GTM and GA. Is that correct?
So yeah, in my team, they would do everything from managing GTM to auditing to project management to tackling everything.
So like 3 people around 70 countries, like 70 regions.
Yes, but not at the same time on 70 projects. So it's you have to project manage it at some point as well.
Okay. I mean, very interesting take. Any other thoughts on the matter?
If I had to design this team, like I would have like a product owner, of course, like for example, someone like me who is looking up for the entire GA or entire digital tracking. So I would just have me who is creating the project plan. But what the most important thing which I would keep in mind is someone doing QA for all this things, like like same as audit, like.
Correct.
But for me, the most important thing would be a good QA team who is continuously monitoring the migration, and I think that would be the key to success, like while making sure that you're implementing it the right way.
Amazing. So
yeah, like apart from the developers' efforts for data layers and like the technical stuff.
Okay.
Without that, I would have like 3 to 4 QA guys who are like monitoring the sites.
Great. Okay. So we have implementation plus data quality controls, and then we have one team which is global but handles all aspects of. I guess that also leaves less room for error, because there are only 5 people who are managing all of that work, and there's no need to worry about discrepancies. Okay, great. Very, I think, very interesting outlooks. We'll just talk a bit about how I was planning on going through it and why I chose the team that I chose. This has slightly wider array from, I guess, what we were talking about, but I would also involve some help from our legal team, because we do need to actually set the company's approach to data. So I would also involve them, though they would be, I guess, not as involved as the agencies and the dev teams and the project managers. But we'd at an outer orbit of how we do things, we'd probably also involve legal team. And I think as Shanky and you mentioned, sorry, Ritvik, thank you, Ritvik. So as Shanky and Ritvik mentioned, I think agencies and consulting would be the area where we'd need the most help, because implementing it and making sure that the data quality is right is probably the most important things. So agencies and dev team would actually be like the two sides of the coin which would work together the most via you. And the legal team would actually kind of pitch in and help you create a proper plan which would actually withstand something after the GA4 migration, because while GA4 migration is the more immediate pain, we also have to deal with the other changes around DPAs that are happening. So we'd have someone from the legal team, we'd have agencies and consulting, we'd have the dev team, which is I think fairly straightforward, and then we have the regional teams. And once we actually finalize a plan between the first 4 circles, like between dev team, project managers, legal, and agencies, once we create one proper framework of what we think is acceptable, that is when we go to the regional teams, because that's like the next step that we're talking about. So we have the expertise coming in from the agencies and consulting. We have the legal advice coming in from the legal team. Project managers to actually make sure timelines, timeframes are all set in motion at the right time, and then dev team to actually set up the proper supporting code that we need to make it all work. And once we have all that, we'll actually build something called, or what I would prefer to call as a minimum configuration rollout, because as we spoke about before, since we're dealing with a market which has multiple regions and multiple frameworks, ways of working, it's probably not the best idea if you let everybody do what they want with respect to their data protection and data usage, if you will. So the idea is to actually slowly but evenly raise the bar for all your brands, where it could be a very simple Excel spreadsheet that I've had here. We don't do anything which is very complicated. We don't focus on measurement protocol or data import. Well, that depends on what you're doing, but for the most case, we don't focus on something that's very complicated. We focus on the very basic stuff. We'll focus on data collection, that all markets across Lego, no exceptions, are tracking e-commerce events. And then for custom events, the key features and flows are being tracked. And then we talk about custom dimensions in the same light. We'll focus first on the most important ones, and then we'll move to the next one. So then we have user ID, referral exclusion, and all of this, right? So this sheet would become the source of truth for your regional teams, and they'll use that to configure their GA4 basis that. So if tomorrow somebody would come and ask me, hey, what's happening in UK? I don't have to guess. I know, because I agreed on a minimum configuration document. I know for a fact that every market everywhere is tracking this, right? So that is how you slowly but evenly move ahead with your migration. And that's what I can probably think of a better word for this, but a minimum configuration document. So there we go.
Would this be equivalent to a tagging plan?
So would this be equivalent to a tagging plan that you would develop?
I would consider this different from a tagging plan, because this is more focused on your GA4 setup rather than how the data are actually coming into GA. And so it's not about the naming of the events, right? But it's more about what configurations and what data is available in each market. So I guess that's the thing here. And I don't have it in the screenshot here, but this document will have a slight gap, or rather it extends a bit over GA4. It also talks about your BigQuery data sets, because we are not just tracking data to break it, right? I mean, we don't want to do all this and then get fined. So we also add some sections about some minimum configurations that you need to do for privacy as well. And then everybody follows that. Cool. Thank you. Moving on to the next section, which is measuring success and closing thoughts. So I will pass it over to Chibugo for closing this session, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anirudh, for walking us through privacy and all the details we need to know in terms of migration. So without wasting much time, I will go on to talk about how we are measuring the success and as well go to the closing thoughts. So implementation is very, very important. You all will agree with me, but collecting it in the right way is also important, which is much more important. So one thing is UA to GA4 migration gives you opportunities to refresh, more like start from the beginning. I know a lot of us made a mistake years ago while we were implementing the UA, probably collecting data that are not relevant to our business. You also agree with me that presently in UA we have about, I think, 70-something plus standard reports that we currently don't use. You and I maybe will end up using only 20 to 30. And that is actually one of the reasons in GA4, Google has given users that authority to build out the reports they want. So when you are planning to make the move from UA to GA4, it's very, very important to consider the data you are going to migrate. You don't just copy everything you have in UA or move them to GA4. Try to validate your data, have a stakeholder meeting, try to understand from departments what are relevant or what reports they want to see. Based on that, you can migrate these events to GA4. So rather than just trying to move everything you have in UA, we recommend you carry out this stakeholder interview, try to understand what departments need before you can migrate these events to GA4. So don't just move all events. Also, this migration gives you the opportunity to understand or define a new architecture for your business. Now, considering the Lego business, let's just say that each market, yes, you agree with me that in UA, you just have one property and you create views, while in GA4 is just the property which is just available for standard users and sub-property for 360 users. Now, for a business like Lego, they can actually have one property and use sub-properties to define data for other markets. Now, in that case, they are trying to maintain data governance. So not all markets can be able to see data for other markets. So people from a particular region or from a particular market will not be able to see data for other markets and region. So this gives us the opportunity to start afresh, have a rethink, create a new architecture that best work and define our business. So the next, I've put together critical metrics you need to focus while migrating from UA to GA4. So first is the tag. Okay, I know we did point out that 5 markets in the Lego business currently have the base tags. Probably they are collecting page view events and some of auto events from GA4. So you may want to consider deploying the base tags, which is the first thing you need to do to start collecting page view events. Businesses have been doing this long ago. So if you're still yet to migrate, the first thing you need to do is to have your tag placed so you can at least start collecting page view tags and all the auto GA4 events. The next will be to extract data, which is data backup, UA, to migrate your historical data or backup your historical data. So it's something that is very important in order to keep data and as well have data to feed into your external report platforms like your Looker Studio and the rest of them. The next one is transform. So which is same thing as mapping and consolidating your event. So it's also important to translate the important data that are valuable, like data that is important to your business. You just need to export this, understand what is important to your business as well as regions and markets, then try to convert and translate them to GA4. So now you know that UA structure is just events, category label, while GA4 is a bit flexible where you can name your parameters the way you want that best fits your business. So you may want to translate this and understand the KPIs that are very relevant to your business before you can start the migration. Now the next thing is load, which is more of creating reports around the metrics that are relevant to your business. So depending on your business, in our case, we are using Lego Business, which is an e-commerce business. So one of their primary goals is actually to make sales. So purchase events will be one of their primary KPIs. Maybe add to cart, sign up may also be one of them. So you may want to keep track of all these metrics and make sure that you're able to replicate these reports from GA4 or your custom reports in GA4. And lastly is the training, which is very, very vital in GA4 migration. So you need to invest much. I know there are a couple of contents online, both on YouTube and some blog posts. So training documents or resources are available on the internet. Just wanting to call out that changes are currently happening. Google keep making changes in GA4. So some articles that were written months ago may be outdated in terms of screenshots and processes of how things are being done. For example, debug view was actually moved, I think sometime last year, from each location. So you could imagine someone that wrote a blog post 6-7 months ago. If you are reading that article as a newbie, you will be confused when you're trying to access the debug view. So I recommend that whenever you're trying to read any article online or you're accessing any content online, try to check the date it was published so you can make sure you're actually consuming something that is of recent. So the next one here is common pitfalls and tips. So what you can actually maybe call best practices. So one of them is setup assistance. So currently in your UA, if you check your settings or admin panel, you should be able to see this setup assistance. So this will guide you in setting up your GA4 account. So if you're yet to do that, you can actually leverage this option to migrate or set up your GA4 account. You barely for standard users, you have less than 3 weeks to do this. The next one is
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Anybody fasting in this room? Okay, thank you.
So the next one is event name. So when you are naming your event, there are certain recommended events in Google recommends. So you can actually see this in the Google support article. Some of them, I think, the login, sign up, and a couple of them. Our recommendation is to maintain these recommended event names. The reason is this. Don't quote me, like I don't know, but Google may decide to build out standard reports. And if they're going to do that, this will be based on the recommended events they've shared. So if you are trying to use any event name on your own, you may be missing out on these reports. The next one is the naming convention. When you're trying to name your events, your parameters, try to use the snake case. So which is, if it's 2 words, you put 1 underscore, then the next one, as you can see here. So, and also try to keep your parameter names as well as values in lowercase. This is a recommendation, and all the Google documents I've been reading and all the event names that are given, all of them are in snake case and in lowercase. So we recommend you follow that steps too. Then staging property. UA to GA4 migration, one thing you need to consider when doing that is having a test environment or development environment, considering whatever you wish to call it, where you actually test features before you roll out to production. Now, if you have these properties, be it mobile app or your web property, try and have a staging environment where you can actually push test data, validate that before you roll out to your production property. The reason is this, so you can have a cleaner data in your production. You don't mess things up in your production. And lastly, data retention. So currently in GA4, for standard users, they have the option of 2 months and 14 months in terms of data retention, while for 360 users, they have up to 50 months. Now, what if you set your data retention to 2 months or 14 months? For example, you set it to 2 months. Whenever you are building out your exploration report, which is your custom report in GA4, you'll be limited to date range of 2 months. So you need to be aware of this and consider this whenever you're setting up your GA4, whether you want to increase your data retention age date. Also try to consult your legal team before doing this. It's very, very important. And Lastly, closing thoughts. I have a slide here that kind of summarize everything we've discussed today. So the first one is the privacy audit. Anirudh spent a whole lot of time on that. So it's recommended you try to audit the data you are collecting. Make sure you are collecting the right data and your legal team are aware of each data or any data you are collecting to your GA4. The second one is pilot runs for new features. So if you are rolling out any feature in GA4, be it adding custom dimensions to your properties and sub-properties, rather than spending time doing this manually, there are a couple of APIs you can actually leverage to do this. I know it's a couple of scripts you can use to roll out custom dimensions across all your properties in GA4 as well as sub-properties. So we don't advise you do this manually. You try to use these features. Also, when you're rolling out new features, also try to use your staging environment, test them out before you roll out to other markets. The consent mode. So provide more accurate collection of digital interaction data in compliant manner. So this is very, very important. I know we've discussed about that, we've asked questions. So keep this in mind when you're migrating to GA4. Make sure that users are actually consenting to the data you are collecting. And lastly is training and certifications, which I've mentioned a couple of times. That is very, very important. So try as much as possible to provide training, like train yourself, upskill, and as well as provide training for your team if you are leading this migration. And that leads me to a very quick slide I created about training and education. So feel free to take a screenshot if you want. I won't go in depth explaining this, but for training, you can actually go for two options, live training and pre-recorded. So for the live training, you may, considering that using Lego as a business case, as a use case, sorry, you may want to have live training for maybe, let's say, departmental leads for each region, where you can cover the introduction, beginner, and intermediate, and these people can actually pass this knowledge to their team. Alternatively, you can have pre-recorded trainings, and I've grouped that in 5 categories. So we have the introduction, beginner, intermediate, advanced, and master. And you can see each of them have broken down the type of trainings you can actually have. So you can actually have a pre-recorded training and have it uploaded where people can actually get access to that, watch and understand what they need to know before they can access and be successful while using GA4. Also, this will be helpful for people, for onboarding, for people that are joining your team. They can be able to use this for upskilling. And that brings us to the last slide. So if you are yet to start your GA4 migration, I think it's something you need to consider. Free users, please start now. While 360 users, I know you still have enough time, but the earlier the better. And if you have any questions or if you need a support, or maybe your client is looking for an agency to support with the migration, you feel free to reach out to us at infotrust.com/contact. You can actually provide or discuss further on how we can partner with your clients or help them have a successful migration. Also, if you need articles on GA4, we do post or release articles on our blog posts. So endeavor to visit InfoTrust /Google Analytics 4 to get latest updates and articles on GA4. I don't know if you have any question on a few things I've shared here.
Since long time ago, Google has been recommending to create GA4 accounts instead of UA accounts, or at least create both together, and it's been providing a mechanism to connect both accounts together. And today, I just realized that even without inserting the tag for GA4 account in the website, in the head of the website, or in the tag manager, our GA4 accounts are collecting data through that connection. So this question comes in my mind that is this connection only for maintaining the data integrity, or can we rely on the historical data that it brought?
Quick question. Did you create this GA4 property or it was automatically created by Google?
No, we created both accounts together. I mean, GA4 and UA accounts when we were creating the first time.
When was this? Sorry, I'm just trying to understand before I answer your question. Was this recent or something that happened years ago?
Actually, we have both. Some of them are recent, some of them are from many times ago. For example, 1 year ago.
Okay, because recently Google did mention that if you don't create a GA4 account, they will do that automatically for UA accounts. And maybe that is what happened. In your case, maybe that is what happened. So if Google actually did that, or you linked your GA4 to UA, then that is why you are seeing data. Now, in terms of assessing your historical data, it depends on what events that are being collected. Our recommendation is not to allow Google or allow automatic creation of GA4 migration. You should be the one leading that, so you can be able to implement all the events you have. Now, I don't know, I don't have access to your property. I don't know if you're actually collecting the right events that you need, or maybe you're collecting the right events you have in UA and GA4. That is something you may want to reach out, or you want to check. But whichever way, yes, if I'm sure you're collecting page view tags, you can actually use that to analyze your data and maybe try to validate and QA both UA and GA4 just to know whether it's okay. But I doubt you are going to be collecting all the relevant events you have in UA if you didn't do the migration yourself. I don't know if this answered the question.
Yeah, I'll just add something on to what he just mentioned. I think one other aspect of this is that GA4 is a completely different data structure altogether. So I wouldn't get my hopes up on this connection working out for you in more ways than what it's already working for you. So for certain common, day-to-day events like page views and scrolls, where there's no real complication of any, use case, to be honest, those might probably port over pretty easily. But for the other stuff, we wouldn't recommend it either. So yeah, so I guess that's not changing for you.
Okay, thanks.
On top of that only, so as I told you initially that we have a requirement where we want to move from GA to GA4. Okay, and our current application supports GA very well and everything is there. Okay, but now since GA4 is not compatible with that application, we have to develop either in-house or go with some agency or something. I want to understand technically when we are implementing, like previously we used to get a JS script which we have to add and then integrate individual events and everything in GA. How it will be different for GA and GA4, or we could rely, as you said, like for some of the common features which will be matching, it will be same. But like take an example of an e-commerce industry. Few events which is default given was in GA, same will be available in GA4. So do we need to do a new implementation for that, or we can use the existing one?
So the way it works for apps is that the connection for GA4 for apps directly flows over from Firebase. So I guess my first question to you would be, are you using Firebase for your apps?
No.
I guess that's the main problem there, because there are ways to do it too. The only option now is, you have to download a tag management platform like Google Tag Manager for apps, and then send the information from GTM to your apps. So that might be one step of additional implementation that you'll need to do. But yeah, usually the way it works is there will be some changes that you'll need to take, because with apps there is much less flexibility as you would have with a website to change and play things with. But
so, sorry to interrupt. We have a website only. Means the application means like the framework what we are using. So we are using Magento. I guess you might be aware. Yeah. So we are using Magento. Magento is capable with Google Analytics, but it's not capable with Google Analytics 4, so GA4. So we want to migrate.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I guess if it's a website, there's not as much complication at all. I guess the only problem is you are looking to send information straight from your Magento system to
GA4.
yeah, or GA3 before,
Okay,
and that worked well for you.
yes.
I guess what's happening now is you can't do the same connection with GA4 because, well, it's new and you don't have the native connections that you got. So
We have not explored yet.
Correct.
We want to explore, but
Uh-huh.
like I want to know what will be the quantum of work we need to do.
okay, so in some ways it's not exactly the same, but there are some similarities to what you're saying with a server-side implementation. What
Yes.
you're really saying is the data goes to the server,
Yes.
and then from the server you send it to GA4.
Yes.
That's another technology that we are talking about anyway. It's server-side GTM, and you can do that too there. But that's again a separate GTM-specific setup. And I guess what you are asking for is something that is within Magento itself. Like Magento in its UI offers a GA
Yes,
connection.
all the integrations like the events or the everything is captured there.
Correct.
It's already integrated.
Okay.
And now we want to move to GA4. So
Mhm.
like, do I need to change everything, or like I can reuse the code which is written for GA?
I don't think you'll be able to use much of the code that you have for UA because all of that is coming from a Magento specific perspective, right? I would suggest let's not worry about your GA3 data now because, but for GA4, right, the approach that we suggest is actually going for a data layer model. You don't wait to collect data in your Shopify or your Magento account first and then push that from there to your GA account. We rather push it into something we call a data layer, which is
Yeah, already data.
okay. So you're actually pushing data from data layer to then to Magento and then to GA4. Sorry.
No. So for Magento, there is a separate implementation like
Okay.
data flowing in Magento. But for pushing data to Google Analytics, there is
Okay.
a data layer.
Okay.
Okay, we are using that data layer to push the data to
Okay.
Google Analytics.
Okay. So data is first going to Magento and then it's going to the
Yes.
user analytics, right?
Yes.
So I guess in that way, if you already have a data layer set up, I guess the most easiest way is to just set up your GTM to actually work on that data layer and send information straight to GA4. So I guess you don't have to do it via Magento.
Okay.
Even if they do recommend it, it's probably not the best way to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just add some thoughts to that before winding up the session. I know we are almost over time and we have food also waiting for us outside. So just to add on, I think it's also a matter of approach, how you want if you want to move everything over from UA to GA4, that's not a recommended approach, right? We talked about that earlier. There's something called as data minimization where we want to measure only what is absolutely needed. So there's scope for an audit before you actually start doing that. And then once you have decided what is the outcome of that audit, then there are different ways to make it happen. So that said, can I have the clicker? Thank you. So you do have all these ways to reach out to us, or you can just walk up to any one of us in the room. So we do have our employees. First of all, if you could please give a round of applause to our amazing speakers for the day. We also have Nidhi. She is also from InfoTrust, along with myself. So we are all from the team. That's it. Thanks for all the amazing questions. We do have a feedback form, so if you don't mind sharing some feedback for us, that would be amazing. We do have a QR code that can be scanned. So I'll leave this on. Just a quick activity before we wind up. We were hoping to do an icebreaker at the beginning, but we are waiting for more people to come in. So what we're going to do is pretty simple. It won't take a lot of time. I'm going to request all of you to pair with another person in the room, okay? And just introduce yourself. So all you have to do is find another person in the room and just introduce yourself to the other person and get that other person's introduction. So 3 things to cover basically: the name, where you work, and what brought you here today, right? And at the end of this, we'll probably have a couple of minutes for all this. And at the end of this, I'll randomly pick 3 people, and those 3 people will have to introduce the other person who they spoke about, who they spoke to, right? So let's get started.